Hey, so take just a moment. Don't overthink it. Don't edit yourself. How would you finish this sentence for yourself? Maybe someday I will blank. Maybe someday I'll be happier. Maybe someday I'll be healthier. Maybe someday this will be true of me and this will no longer be true of me. Maybe someday I'll go on that adventure, reach that goal, live in this new place, be with this kind of person, right? We all have these maybe someday ideas for what our lives could be. And this is where great stories start. But this is not where great stories and great lives stay, right? So if you want to be a kind of person who does big things, who makes some big important changes in your life, who aligns their actual life with the calling and their sort of vocation and the reason they're alive and here on the planet. If you want to be one of those types of people, you're in the right place. Today we're going to talk about how to clearly define the home, the comfort zone that we have to leave. And then I've got a few practical steps we can take to start to actually do the hard work of leaving our comfort zones and starting to embark on our epic quest. So, really glad you're here. Welcome to episode 3 of Me and the Quest. Well, hey, welcome to Me and the Quest. This is a show about doing big things, making big changes, spending more of our lives doing what we're alive to do. And if all that sounds a little bit grandiose and intimidating, I promise you it's not. Lots of Disney and like kids movie analogies. And I'm the host, right? I'm not an expert. So, this is not a lecture. This is not something to be intimidated by. This is just stuff that I am using in my life. I'm finding helpful. I'm learning as I go. And as tends to be the case, probably more to learn from my failures than even from my successes, right? And I have more failures to learn from, so that works out. Really glad you're here. Just a quick note, does help the show immensely if you can subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on your podcast app, leave reviews. All that's very helpful. Home base for the show is Instagram. It's just my favorite social media platform. So at Me and the Quest and at Ben and the Family Quest. Ben and the Family Quest, by the way, is the name under which I make music right now. You can check me out, Spotify, Apple Music, all those places. I've got 4 songs out as Ben and the Family Quest. But enough about that and all the housekeeping stuff. Let's get into the good stuff. Let's get into the reason you're here. Let's get into Act 1 of the episode today. So the goal of Act 1 is to identify what we want as it relates to this episode and what is the problem that's keeping us from what we want. And so what we want is how we would have finished that sentence in the beginning, right? Maybe someday I'll blank. Whatever came to mind there, that's what I want you to hold in mind as the goal that we're longing for, right? What is the problem? Most of us won't leave the comfort zone to go get that thing. None of us want to leave the comfort zone, right? And that's actually an important thing to remember, that even the few who do, even the heroes who venture out, the people we admire, the people who inspire us, it's not like they were superhuman and immune to the paralyzing fear of the unknown, and that they like woke up excited every day to do big, scary things and put themselves out there or risk failure or whatever it was, right? It's not like they were that different than us. They just made the decision to answer the call and go on their epic quest. That's why they are the people kind of that we put on a pedestal and admire and want to follow in the footsteps of. But most of us, sort of the unfortunate truth is that most of us won't. We won't leave the land of maybe someday, where we're all just kind of hanging around talking about the maybe someday things we want to do. Most of us won't leave home. Most of us won't leave the comfort zones, leave our comfort zones. So that's the problem. There's this gap. There's this big old gap, and I almost picture it like you can almost picture a map where on the far left you've got the land of maybe someday. It's probably an island. I think a lot of stories start on an island. There's something that kind of rings true about that isolation, the what the ocean represents, right? Of this big, scary, unknown thing that we have to cross to even to leave the comfort zone, to leave the world we've known. So there's this island, the land of maybe someday, and there's this ocean, and there's mountains, and there's valleys, and there's scary monster things that we have to slay, right? And all of that stands in between what's on the far right, which is what we said we wanted for our maybe someday. That was our maybe someday longing is way over there. That X on the map, right? But here's one kind of important point to make about what the problem is. The problem is not the ocean and the mountains and the valley and the villains and the hardships. That's actually not the problem. The problem is our fear of those things. The problem is our unwillingness to go and do something. The problem is not the scary hardships that await us. The problem is that we won't leave home. So now we're clear about what we want. We're clear that the problem is not the hardships, the scary things. The problem is our relationship to those things. It's that we won't leave home. It's that we won't leave our comfort zones. So let's get into Act 2. Okay, so what do we need to overcome that problem and get what we long for? What we need is to leave home. What we need is to acknowledge this simple, unavoidable fact that I'm sure we're going to keep coming back to throughout the life of the show. Every hero has to leave home. Every great story, and then I would argue every great life, starts with the hero leaving home, leaving the comfort zone, leaving the island, leaving the village, leaving the status quo behind. Whatever it is that you long to do, that you long to be true for your life, that I long to be true for my life, whatever that is, it's going to take a lot of things, but all those other things are null and void if we don't leave home. So some examples of homes that we have to leave. There are some obvious ones that I think are obvious to see and really hard to actually stop doing. Sort of the obvious ones about like distracting yourself with Netflix, with alcohol, with your dumb friends, like whatever your go-to is for distracting yourself from what it is you are supposed to be doing, right? If you long to write the next great American novel, and every time you have a few minutes to sit down and write, you scroll on Facebook instead, that's a home that that's part of the home you have to leave. The tricky thing about this is I think there are those obvious ones, but there's also, it gets way more complex and nuanced than that too, right? I think a lot of times the home we have to leave is a mindset. I think it's these mental ruts we get in. I think it's the way we talk to ourselves, the way we react, the way we process the world. You know, most of us know, like, hey, if I want to run a marathon, I should probably eat, fewer Snickers bars. That's pretty obvious. Where it gets more complex is getting into the nitty gritty of like, well, why do I love Snickers bars so much? Besides the nougat and the peanuts and the caramel and the chocolate, I want a Snickers bar now. There's always a why behind it. Why do the particular distractions, the particular coping mechanisms, the particular ruts we get in, the safe places we retreat to. And it's not always like actual isolation. Sometimes we hide in work. We hide in the people we spend time with from, doing the work we're meant to do. As I talk up this idea of leaving home, I think it's also important to reflect on our lives and see just how many times we've already done this. If you've ever been in a romantic relationship, even if it didn't work out, you had to leave home to start. Like, two single people left their comfort zones, opened themselves up to rejection for a romantic relationship to begin, right? If you've ever had a job, you had to go to a job interview and risk being let down, risk being rejected. And chances are we've all liked people and pursued people that we were, wanted to date or whatever, that didn't like us back. And we've all applied for jobs we didn't get. We've all tried to do things and failed. And we're still here. And I think that's super helpful to remember that, yeah, this is important, but like, these aren't real dragons. These aren't real villains with weapons that are, trying to decapitate us or anything, right? This is this is embarrassment, this is some disappointment, this is a sense of wasted time, but like this is not literal life and death. So sometimes our bodies are the more instinctual parts of our brains in our fight or flight responses. Like our bodies will actually, we're kind of dumb. We start to think that, if I put this on the internet and it doesn't go over well, I might die. So my fight or flight kicks in, and most of the time for me, it's flight. Like if I'm scared that, this podcast is going to be misunderstood or just a waste of time, or I'm going to be embarrassed by it or whatever, my response is flight. It's run away, delete my accounts, and like just hide and live alone in my safe solitude. But it's important for me to remind myself as I'm recording this, like if this doesn't go over well, if I'm not super happy with it, if people comment mean things, like I'm not going to die. I'm going to be fine. So every hero has to leave home. It's just how it is. If you're going to do something big that's meaningful, if you're going to make a change in your life that's long overdue, you've got to leave home. You've got to leave the comfort zone. So let's jump into Act 3 and talk about, I got 3 steps that I think are really, really powerful in helping us define home and then actually leave it. So Act 3, part of the show, we're going to wrap things up, make sure that we are really clear about something practical we can do. We know we have to leave home. We know this is an unavoidable fact. Let's talk about how to do that. So three phases, right? Number 1, we have to define our home, define our comfort zone. And hopefully as the show's been going on, you've already been starting to visualize and sort of, just get some more clarity about what that is for you. It's going to look a little different for all of us. But what is that comfort zone, that safe place, the way it's always been done, the status quo? What is that you have to leave behind? Okay. Now, number 2, step 2 here is really important one. And it's going to be really easy to not do it exactly like I say. But there's reasons which I'll explain here in a second. There's reasons why I would highly recommend you do it, like I'm about to say. So what we want to do is we want to weigh home that we're going to have to leave. We're going to kind of have that on one side. And then on the other side, we're going to have this thing that we want. And like I said, episode 2, we talked about climactic scene. We talked about the fade to black scene, like when all the plot points have been resolved. What is this thing what is this vision that we want to chase? And like, what is it that we want to be true? That's on one side. The home that we have to leave and the discomfort that's involved there is on the other side. We have to weigh those two things. Is it worth leaving home and the fear and the discomfort there? Is it worth it if it means we can have and potentially have this vision that we're chasing after? Vice versa. Is it worth the comfort and the familiarity and the same old of home? That sounds nice. We get to kind of play it safe. Just nice, easy, steady life. We get to keep that, but in return, we don't get that thing. That thing's now off the table because we're refusing to leave home. Is that worth it? And if the answer is, yeah, you know what? I weighed it and I'm just going to stay home. Number 1, you might be doing it wrong, and that's fine. Make sure you might be doing it right. Maybe it's, maybe your vision needs to be recalibrated. Maybe it really isn't worth it. Maybe you're meant to stay home and watch Netflix. But if you said, yes, I've decided it's worth it. I've decided it's worth the discomfort and giving up that security of home for the potential of this vision I'm chasing. What I want you to do is actually, this is the part where I'm saying you're going to be tempted to just listen to this or watch this and sort of agree with it, and then just move on. What I found really helpful for me is to give myself something like this, a decision like this, give it a moment in time and space, give it some sort of ceremony. Take yourself out for a coffee and mark it in some way, start a new journal, write it down, give yourself a tattoo. Maybe not give yourself a tattoo. very unlikely that's a good idea. Find some way to commemorate this. Like I said, go out, take a day off, and go for a drive. And like, this is the day that I decided it was worth it. It was worth leaving home for the potential of that vision coming true. Find some way to commemorate that, to keep that in front of you, that on this day I decided that this is worth it. And then, because we're going to keep coming back to that. So let's say you've done these first two steps. You've defined what home is. In the last episode, you defined what it is you're chasing. So you've got those things defined. This next step, you weigh them, and then you decide in a clear manner and like a no way around it. Like, I've decided this is worth it. I'm going to pursue this thing. And you've found some way to sort of keep that in front of you, to be reminded of that. Now, the final phase of this is not a one-time thing like step 2, but it is a daily, maybe moment by moment practice that we need to implement into our lives, which is reminding ourselves constantly that the decision has already been made, that we've decided that this vision we're chasing is worth the hardships and the discomfort of leaving home. We've already decided. It's now a non-negotiable. And, we can still get on Instagram occasionally, and we can still, watch the trending thing on Netflix or Disney Plus or Amazon or Hulu or one of the multitude of streaming services. We can still find time for that, but we're no longer mindlessly doing that stuff to distract us from the important work that we're being called to. That's done. That decision has been made. Remember on, that date when we took ourselves out to coffee and decided this is worth it and I'm going to do this. That day when we, went out on a date with our spouse and talked about this together and said, you know what, like, it's time to do this thing. Have that moment in time, have that ceremony, that thing you can look back on, and constantly remind yourself of that. And believe me, I do not have this down at all. But I'm still constantly up and down, and parts of me are trying so hard to get out of this and just go back home where it's comfortable. But I've done some things to trap myself into this story. I have things I can look back on and say, you know what? I remember that I decided this is worth it. I remember that, you know what? It might not work out, but I can look back on times in my life when things didn't work out and I survived. And honestly, a lot of times, either it was kind of good that thing didn't work out, or at least I learned some lessons from it, right? So like, it wasn't a waste of time. So you know what? We're going to do this thing. So, The Mandalorian, which looks great, and I haven't seen it yet. I can wait because I got to make a podcast, right? That bag of candy I'll eat in celebration after my marathon run, whatever it is, right? This money that I could spend on X, Y, and Z to kind of put a Band-Aid on my boredom, I'm going to put that in the bank instead because this thing that I'm doing is more important to me. So you're going to define home. And if you haven't already defined the vision that you're chasing somewhat, these two scenes talked about in episode 2, then step 2, we're going to weigh those. We're going to commemorate the moment that we decide that it's worth it, that it's worth leaving home. And it's definitely not worth, the nice, warm, fuzzy feeling of sort of just the same old that we're still kind of like not happy with, but at least it's familiar. It's not worth staying there to give up what we could have, what we're meant to do. So we're going to not only make that decision, but we're going to find a way to commemorate it and keep coming back to it and keep that decision in front of us at all times, so that this final step, on a daily basis, on a moment-to-moment basis, we're holding ourselves accountable to this decision that's already been made, that it's a non-negotiable. We're doing this thing. We decided it was worth it. So like it or not, kind of dragging yourself along, basically, right? And I mean, that's what I'm essentially had to drag myself out here to the shed today to record this episode, because so much of me wants to stay home and not bother, not take the risk, not risk the embarrassment, not risk the waste of time. But at a couple different stages along the way, I've made decisions that, you know what, I'm going to do this. And so here I am talking to myself in my cold shed. So I know this idea of leaving home, of leaving our comfort zones is scary and intimidating. But I hope that this has been a friendly push, that you feel like this is helpful in some way, and that we can acknowledge that it's going to be worth it. So let me know, how this lands with you, anything I missed, any additional thoughts you think would be helpful or questions you have for me. Make sure you hit me up somewhere online. I'm pretty easy to find. If you're watching this video, you can find me. You know how the internet works. Yeah, I'm interested to continue this conversation, both in comments and direct messages. Reach out to me. And then obviously next week on episode 4, every Wednesday. But before that, we've got the epilogue. This is the part of the show after the show, essentially. This sort of casual conversation at the end. And today, related to this idea of home, actually, and also around the time this episode's coming out, my son Forrest is turning 3. We're also finding out the gender right around now of our second child, which is on the way, coming in May. And so I want to talk about a topic that, is close to my heart, which is this idea that does settling down, in quotes, does settling down, getting married, having kids, that, settling down, does that mean the death of these other dreams I had? And actually, you could say the other way around too. Like, I want to do this and this, but I'm single, or my life doesn't look like I wanted it to. I'm divorced. I'm whatever. Is that gonna ruin my dreams, my goals? So, this is something I have given a lot of thought to. Had plenty of conversations with others about, and so I have a couple thoughts I'd like to share on that idea. So yeah, on YouTube, the video will be popping up somewhere now, and in the podcast, just stick around for a few seconds of bump music and we'll be into the epilogue. See you there.